Imagine you're driving in one of the most dangerous races in the world. You've been behind the wheel for hours. And after 1,000 kilometers on open roads, with the constant engine noise and your concentration pushed to the limit, your body starts to pay the price. You know that a mistake could cost you your life, and yet you keep going until a stop comes along that you're grateful for. You park your Ferrari, and there she is. In the crowd, there is the love of your life. You walk up to her, kiss her, and for a moment, all your exhaustion disappears. You regain your drive, get back in the car, and speed off again in search of that victory you've always dreamed of. Minutes later, you're dead. And the most chilling part is that days before, you had written a letter to the woman you loved in which you said it was impossible to remember every turn of the course, that a mistake could kill you, and that, moreover, it could kill others. You had practically anticipated the tragedy that was about to happen. This is what happened to Alfonso de Portago, and today I'm going to tell you his story. The story of one of the greatest tragedies in the history of motorsport, the story of the kiss of death. And stay until the end because what happened was much more chilling than you can imagine. Alfonso Antonio, Vicente Eduardo Ángel Blas, Francisco de Borja Cabeza de Vaca y Leighton, better known as Alfonso de Portago, he was a Marquis, godson of King Alfonso XIII, and heir to one of the most important titles in Spain. His grandfather had been Minister of Public Instruction and Mayor of Madrid, so power and influence were a natural part of his environment. In addition, among his ancestors was also Álvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, one of the great Spanish explorers. So, in a way, risk and danger were not foreign to his family name, something that would be key throughout his life. In addition, his environment was backed by a fortune of around $500 million, an inheritance that guaranteed him a completely settled life. With that context, his destiny seemed clear: business, representation, and prestige. Not engines pushed to the limit or car racing, so he could have lived peacefully with his life secured. But it wasn't like that. When he was very young, his father passed away, and that forced him to grow up quickly. It also shaped his personality more clearly. A personality that, at 17 years old, made him take a borrowed plane and fly it under London's Tower Bridge just to win a $500 bet. He didn't need to do it. He clearly didn't need the money. He just did it because he could. The adrenaline, the risk, and the danger were his main motivations. He wasn't looking for chaos, he was looking to master it. First it was horses, when he competed as a jockey in the Grand National. Then it was ice, when he was part of the first Spanish bobsleigh team. And finally, car racing. On the other hand, the press saw him as the perfect aristocrat, young, wealthy, and always surrounded by women. A true playboy of his time. But on the track, that image meant nothing. There, his last name didn't matter, nor did his title, not even his money. The only thing that mattered was how fast he could be. And when he entered the world of motorsports, he did it to prove that he could be the fastest of all. Something that, combined with his personality, would end in the worst possible way. The arrival of Alfonso de Portago in motorsports was truly shocking and broke all the expectations people had about him. In 1953, he met Luigi Chinetti, the Ferrari importer in the United States. Chinetti wasn't looking for celebrities, titles, or well-known last names, but for drivers capable of surviving the Pan-American race to race alongside him. And de Portago was the one chosen. More than 3,000 kilometers crossing Mexico at full speed, on open roads with no margin for error. It wasn't an easy setting, but de Portago proved himself. And that was the perfect stage to start making a name for himself in motorsports. The following year, he raced solo in the 1,000 kilometers of Buenos Aires with his own Ferrari. And in this way, he continued building his career. In total, he won 6 major races, including the Tour de France Automobile, the Oporto Grand Prix, and the Nassau Governor's Cup, which he won twice. De Portago was not paying to compete, unlike what many thought he would do. He was simply competing, and when he competed, true to his personality, he never did things halfway. This helped him stand out and achieve exceptional results. But it also put his life and the lives of others at risk. In fact, there is a phrase of his that defined him perfectly. There comes a time when money bores you and even women no longer satisfy you. At that moment, you discover a drug that becomes your everything, and that drug is called risk. During the race in Nassau in 1956, he was driving at 240 kilometers per hour, just a few centimeters from the car in front of him, and both of them skidded almost 180 meters after an unexpected braking. Portago went in the direction where a crowd was standing, but thanks to his skill at the wheel, he managed to prevent a real tragedy from happening. He was fast, yes, but he always seemed to go a little further than necessary. Among sports car enthusiasts, Portago was known as a two-car man. Because of the large number of burnt brakes, destroyed clutches, damaged transmissions, and ruined cars he left in his wake, he often needed more than one car to finish a race. In 1956, Ferrari gave him 5 Formula One Grand Prix races to evaluate him, and at Silverstone he achieved a shared second place, the first podium for a Spanish driver in the category. He had talent, however. Ferrari saw the same thing as everyone else. With Portago, speed and risk went hand in hand, and the podium didn't resolve the question of whether that trade-off was worth it. Meanwhile, far from the asphalt, he formed the first Spanish bobsleigh team. Edmund Nelson was the one who introduced him to that world years earlier. And remember that name because it will be very important later on. At the 1956 Winter Olympic Games, he finished 4th, just hundredths of a second away from a medal. And a year later, he won the world bronze. At that point, it was already clear that he was not an aristocrat. Looking for experiences to pass the time, since in any field he entered, Portago competed and was almost always among the best. But the problem was still the same as always. He wasn't reliable, and that would end up defining his career and his life. But before we continue, if you're enjoying this video, subscribe. The podium feat at Silverstone caught everyone's attention, but it wasn't enough to make him an official driver. Ferrari had tested him in 5 Grand Prix where he had shown speed, had scored points, and still it wasn't enough. In Maranello, they weren't just looking for talent, but also for safety. And Portago didn't provide that, but since he wanted to stay and be a permanent part of the team, he accepted anything they asked of him. Long races, demanding schedules, conditions that didn't always suit his style. Whatever it was, every time he went out on the track, it was a test, and he responded the best way he knew how, always pushing to the limit. It wasn't his style to hold back or play it safe. On the contrary, he was aggressive, took risks, and set his own records. He didn't let up, he didn't speculate, he didn't manage, he just raced. And despite the constant danger he exposed himself to on more than one occasion, he said he wouldn't die in an accident, but that he would die of old age or in some absurd injustice. His co-driver, Edmund Nelson, didn't share the optimism and used to say that Portago wouldn't make it to 30, something that unfortunately wasn't just dramatics. Nelson used to say that every time Portago came back from a race, the front of his car was always wrinkled, marked by a style of driving always on the edge, where contact was inevitable. Portago had talent, but he also had a way of racing that left little room for error. Finally, in 1957 came the decision that would change history forever, when Ferrari entered him in one of the most demanding races on the calendar, the Miglia. 1,000 kilometers on open roads, a course that was impossible to fully memorize and constant risk, something that at first seemed to favor him. But it would soon become clear that this was not the case. The Mille was not a conventional race. It was a test where just surviving was already an achievement. And with that race about to be run, a phrase that Portago had said a few months earlier began to resonate. "If I die tomorrow, I will have lived 28 wonderful years." It was 1,000 kilometers crossing Italy on open roads, through towns, endless straights, blind curves, and spectators standing right next to the asphalt. There were no wide runoff areas or real margin for error. You raced against the clock and also against everything unpredictable. Days before the start, Portago wrote a letter to his girlfriend in which he said the following: "As you already know, my love, I didn't want to race, but Enzo Ferrari convinced me to do it. I hope I'm wrong, but maybe it's going to be an early death. I don't like the Mille. No matter how much you train and memorize the route, it's almost impossible to remember every curve of the road. And the slightest driving mistake can kill 50 people. since you can't avoid the spectators in the streets. Even so, on May 12, 1957, he took the start with his Ferrari 335S, a brutal car capable of exceeding 300 kilometers per hour, on roads where the only barrier was the crowd. For hours, he remained competitive, keeping a good pace fighting in the top part of the standings. When halfway through, he kept his promise. According to legend, he made a promise to his beloved. When he arrived in Rome, he would give her a long kiss right in the middle of the competition, and then continue with the race. He would make up for the lost time by stepping on the accelerator harder than ever. And that's exactly what happened. Portago approached her, they kissed, and they were photographed. That moment was captured and would later be remembered as the kiss of death. Later on in the race, during a technical stop in Bologna, Ferrari's mechanics warned Portago that he had a badly damaged tire, maybe from an impact or just from wear. They told him it needed to be changed. He asked the technicians if they could fix it quickly, but they told him it would take a long time, so he decided to keep going. Apparently, Enzo Ferrari was there, which added extra pressure, and he told him that if he didn't push hard, his rivals would catch up to him. Leading the race was Piero Taruffi, followed by the Belgian Gandavian, both Ferrari drivers, and Portago was fighting to catch up with them and even overtake them. If he changed the tires, he knew he wouldn't make it. And during the stop to kiss his girlfriend, he had lost 2 minutes that he had to make up no matter what. So Portago began the final part of the route with the car badly damaged, and with only about 70 kilometers left to the finish line, a tire blew out at more than 250 kilometers per hour with a fatal outcome. The car went off the road, crashed into a telephone pole that split the vehicle, and the remains of the Ferrari flew into an area where spectators were watching the race. Portago and his co-driver, Edmund Nelson, died instantly, along with about 10 spectators, 5 of whom were children. Additionally, up to 30 people were injured. The most tragic thing is that at that moment, Nelson's words, which he had often said about Portago not making it to 30, came true. And unfortunately, he shared the same fate. The photograph went around the world and filled all the headlines. A driver getting out of the car, an actress in the crowd, and a kiss before speeding off again. The press called it the kiss of death. The accident not only ended his life, but also marked the end of an era. The Mille, as it was raced on open roads, was never held the same way again. Alfonso Portago was not a world champion. He didn't have a long career, and he died at just 28 years old. In his honor, Curve 9 at the Jarama circuit in Spain was named after him, as well as another at the Olympic bobsleigh circuit in St. Moritz. In this way, his mark was left on the asphalt and on the ice, his two passions. But unfortunately, Alfonso Portago was not the only driver who lost his life in a car, because both motorsport and Formula One have always lived with risk. So watch this video to learn about the most heartbreaking, shocking, and cruel stories that forever marked the category. To learn about the most tragic deaths in the history of Formula One.